Thanks for listening to the Mornings with Carmen LaBerge podcast, made available thanks to support from listeners just like you.
Helping you wake up, remembering this is our Father's world. This is Mornings with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms out wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power, we will go. By your spirit, we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I have a whole new setup in my studio, so I want to hear from you. How do you think it's sounding? I have two monitors, so if I sound distracted, it's because there's just so much more for me to look at now. And so, yeah. Good morning. I'm Carmen LaBerge, listening to Mornings with Carmen here on the Faith Radio Network. You should text me, 877-933-2484. You know, how's it sounding? We're here for you. So I want to know how it's sounding to you this morning. All right, a few years ago, I was visiting a church in Indiana, near Indianapolis. I'm feeling like it had Southport in its name. South something. South, but maybe there was a Minster in there. But no, I feel like it was Southport. Anyway, if you've never been to visit a church, or if you've only ever been to one church, then you don't actually know how every other church does things a little bit differently, and certainly in relationship to visitors. So most churches at some point on a given Sunday welcome visitors. They have this time. Maybe they call it announcement time or whatever, but in there somewhere they're like, hey, welcome to those of you who are visiting with us, and they say something about who they are. And then, if they're nice and they've thought about it in advance, they ask visitors what they can not only expect during the service, but they invite them, like to the welcome center or to the fellowship hall or to the prayer corner, something like, right? Some other specific location where a visitor could stop on their way out and somebody would be prepared to receive them and greet them and talk with them. Well, at this one particular church, they had a really compelling reason to accept that invitation, to go to the Welcome Center. Here was the announcement. If you're a first-time visitor, we have a free pie for you. A free pie? A pie? Like what? A pie, I ask? A whole pie? Yes, a homemade apple pie. Now, people, let me tell you, if the people around your church knew that there was pie at church, more people would come. Like if people knew that what we were doing wasn't just some pie in the sky thing, some pie in the sky religion, if they knew there was real pie, like right now, I think more people would be coming to church. So that is what I thought of when I read today's Growing Your Faith verse of the day. I thought, there's pie right now and people don't know it. So today's Growing Your Faith verse of the day from Zephaniah 3:17. The Lord your God is with you, the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Right now. I mean, right now. Pie. The Lord your God is with you. This isn't a pie in the sky religion. This isn't a wait until you die and meet Jesus. The Lord your God is with you right now, the mighty warrior who saves. He takes great delight in you. He's rejoicing over you with singing. That's like pie right now. God is with you. Very God of very God, God Almighty, King of kings, Lord of lords. God is with you. You are never alone. And what is he doing? He's not all scowly-faced. No, he's guarding, guiding, delighting, loving, forgiving, rejoicing over you with singing. What a way to start the day, right? Now, a hard transition from pie to trash. Yeah, you heard me. From pie to trash. All that trash, it has to go somewhere. You ever thought about that? I mean, you probably have thought at some point about where your trash goes because you have to carry it from one place to another. But do you really know where your trash goes when it leaves the end of your driveway? I mean, maybe you actually have to take it to a dump site. And so, yeah, you know where it goes, but it has to go somewhere. So I remember when my dad's hometown in northern Indiana, Newton County, Indiana, I remember when it became the place where like everyone's trash went. They were designing a huge dump, a landfill to be more accurate. Newton County landfill. It is now the second largest in the United States if you were to measure it by revenue. You can literally drive around it for miles. But back in the day, you could actually get information about the development of the dump. People were interviewed. There was reporting. At least people knew the dump was coming. What happens when there is no local journalism anymore? When there is no local paper? When there is no hometown news? Could your community become a dump site without you even knowing it? This is what I thought about when I read Jeff Bilbro's most recent piece. It's not just about trash. It's also about the death of local journalism. How are those two connected? Well, let's find out next. Our friend Jeff Bilbro will join us. You are listening to Mornings with Carmen. Jeff Bilbro is joining us from Grove City College and Front Porch Republic. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Carmen.
Where does your trash go?
Yeah, well, right now, I don't know.
Right?
But it might be coming to our own neighborhood quite soon. And, as you talked about, it's a tricky issue because obviously we have a kind of addiction to throw away products and they got to go somewhere. So you don't want to be foisting your trash on other people, but you also want to know what's going on in your backyard. And in particular, I think of greatest concern around Western PA and Ohio and this part of the country is what kinds of oil waste is going to be dumped there, because that stuff is quite toxic and it often gets dumped into local landfills. So it's not just household waste, but industrial or oil field waste.
Radioactive trash mountain. That's what caught my attention in your piece.
Yeah.
We moved to Grove City in the summer of 2021. We noticed signs around town expressing opposition to a radioactive trash mountain. I mean, obviously we're going to oppose that.
That's right. And it's tricky because sometimes there's bad information out there and people oppose things because they don't want them. But It's hard to know, is this legitimate? But yeah, in this case, there is probably going to be radioactive waste there. And this part of the country has a unfortunate track record of landfills that leach these toxic chemicals into the waterways. So it's a real concern, but it's really hard to get good information, as you said, because there's just the news industry has collapsed over the last couple of decades, and there's just not the resources for investigative reporting that would actually uncover what's going on.
So that's really what ultimately we're talking about here, is the way that local newspapers, and even in some places regional newspapers, right? They've disappeared. Talk with us about that, not only in your own community, but nationwide.
Yeah, I mean, I cite this book by Margaret Sullivan, who's led both local and now she works for a national paper. But in her book, Ghosting the News, she does a good job, I think, laying out how when local papers evaporate, the result, she says, is less civic engagement, more political polarization, and more potential for government corruption. And you just sort of lose that voice in the community that holds powerful people to account. And so I think it's also part of why we then fixate on distant events, right? It's easier to produce one story about what's happening in Washington, D.C. and send that out to everybody, and everybody gets angry or upset about that. But that turns our attention away from what's going on closer to home, where we might have more obligation and opportunity to respond and get involved.
So this is these numbers are from November of 2023, so now a few months old, but this is from the Associated Press. The decline of local news in the United States is actually speeding up, despite growing attention being paid to the issue. The point where the nation has lost 1/3 of its newspapers and 2/3 of its journalists, newspaper journalists, since 2005. On average, 2.5 newspapers closed every single week in 2023. That is based on a study by Northwestern University that was, again, issued in November of 2023. Here's a quote from Tim Franklin, who heads up the local news initiative at Northwestern's Medill Journalism School. He says, "My concern is that the acceleration we're seeing is only going to get worse. At its current pace, the country will hit 3,000 papers closing in 2 decades, sometime in 2024. There will be just under 6,000 remaining in the entire United States." During that same period of time, 43,000 newspaper journalists have lost their jobs, most of them at daily publications in local communities. And so, yeah, I mean, if there are, that's 43,000 fewer people paying attention to what's going on locally, like the proposed radioactive trash mountain.
Yeah, those numbers are pretty grim, I think. And it's just part of the broader centralization of the economy. I mean, I get the business reasons. There's reasons why it's happening, but the consequences happen then all over the ground in local communities across the country.
So I know that there are folks out there who are trying to, I don't know if the language is resolve this, but answer this question or dilemma by, starting things in their own local communities and doing so kind of on a voluntary basis. Are you hearing some of that where you are?
I haven't seen that here, but I have seen, kind of citizen journalist models in other places. Yeah. Often kind of an email newsletter that you can sign up for. And then, just sort of crowd-sourced journalism. And some of that is really intriguing and well done. So I think, maybe it's not a perfect response, but I think it's certainly a good one. And if you have people who are invested and willing to do the work, I think that can be really valuable.
Yeah, for those of you looking for things like that, you'd be looking for the rise of citizen journalism. That's some of the language out there. There are resources available to you. And as Christians, I would say this is a real opportunity to engage your local community and meet a real need. So this might be a way for Christians to engage in our local communities, find good news stories, and be sharing those. And then also be covering the real news, like go to your school board meetings, go to your county commissioner meetings. There are no longer paid journalists doing those things. And so what does it look like for us as citizens to re-engage in those ways and, become mindful of what's happening in our own local communities? Jeff, anything else on this before we move to another topic?
No, I think that's, I'm glad you ended with that note of hope, because I do think that there are Christians in local communities aware of this problem and trying to be receptive to how God might be calling them to respond.
That's so good. All right, we're going to continue our conversation here with Jeff Bilbro in just a moment. You can find what Jeff is aggregating at frontporchrepublic.com. You can also read this piece that we just talked about. We might be poisoned, but how are we to know? The link is there at Front Porch Republic in Jeff's aggregated newsletter called The Water Dipper. So if you want the direct link, just let me know. The text line is open, 877-933-2484. And we're going to pull something next from the Daily Yonder. Yeah, the Daily Yonder. There's a website you haven't visited, my guess is, lately, and we're going to talk about a rural calling and Reverend Brad Davis. That's up next. You're on Mornings with Carmen.
Do you want to transform your life? Then read the Bible. Hi, I'm Angela, host of Reading the Bible Together. And maybe you're thinking, that's great, but where do I start? We have great study guides and podcasts on a bunch of different studies from Reading the Bible Together. You can find all the information, get the free study guide, listen to the free podcast, find it all at myfaithradio.com. Just look for Reading the Bible Together resource page.
Jeff Bilbro is with us from Grove City College and Front Porch Republic. I am pulling these next items from the Water Dipper, which Jeff aggregates there at frontporchrepublic.com. This is from the Daily Yonder, which, I think is a nod to what we were just talking about. So the Daily Yonder is keeping it rural, covering things in rural America. And this is a personal piece about Reverend Brad Davis. What is the Holler Gospel, and what is Reverend Brad Davis up to?
Yeah, this is a website that you say tries to cover and report on stories that affect rural areas in America. And this I thought was an interesting story about one pastor in Appalachia in a county in West Virginia who is trying to really bring the gospel to people on the margins. The county where he works, apparently the population was 100,000 70 years ago, and now it's 17,000. So it's been hollowed out. The people who remain are often, the people who are neglected. And the gospel always, I think, looks for and is maybe focused on people on the margins and people who have been left behind. So, his efforts to really minister to these people who don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of resources, but are nonetheless beloved by God, I think is really inspiring.
He has founded something called the New Society, a grassroots, simple Central Appalachian movement embracing what he calls a vision of a renewed community along the lines of God's kingdom. I would definitely say that people who go to traditional churches and expect there to be a formulaic, very ordered approach to things would feel relatively uncomfortable in the midst of all of this.
Yeah.
But this is a guy who, he is literally interested in those whose quote, like their backs are up against the wall.
Yeah.
I'm preaching the holler gospel. I'm out there, in the hollowed out, low-lying, depressed places between two hills, and those places that form very narrow valleys that people are forced to walk in these days. It's a beautiful way of seeing and articulating and recapturing the fact that the gospel is for everybody. I also love this guy's personal story. It's on an Easter Sunday that God takes hold of him and resurrects his life, and then he turns that new life over to God and basically says, use me anywhere, any way you want. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I imagine we might have some theological disagreements, but I think his willingness to go to the ends of the earth, as it were, is convicting and inspiring.
Yeah.
And as you point out, his life has clearly been changed by God.
So you've got this other piece highlighted here. It's at the New Yorker. Have the liberal arts gone conservative? What is that? What is that story about, Jeff?
Yeah, this is a really interesting piece. I think Emma Green is a good reporter, and she tries to really dig deep into the boom in classical education across America right now. And it's just a very partisan issue. Unfortunately, it's become a kind of partisan battlefield. But I think she does a good job of pointing out how public schools in many areas aren't doing well, and parents are looking for alternatives. And actually, lots of inner city kids or kids from ethnic minority backgrounds are clamoring to get into classical schools. They see it as offering a better education and offering an education that is oriented toward, as she puts it, this idea that there is objective truth, and that education should orient students towards that truth rather than just help them unfurl their inner self or develop these sorts of skills that can help them be whatever they want to be. So classical ed really is, I think, at a crossroads where it's gone from being a very small, overlooked movement to being something that's gaining a lot of traction right now. And anytime
When,
that kind of growth happens, there's going to be challenges. But I'm quite encouraged by the growing accessibility of this vision for education.
yeah, classical education has been for a long time promoted by um, religious institutions, I would say, and even
Yeah.
very expensive prep schools. But more recently, there's a lot of other folks who've become invested in it, for its real potential for cultivating not only academic excellence, but a genuine understanding of what it means to be human and
Yeah.
what it means to engage as humans in community with one another. Like that is what a classical education yields. I think it yields an understanding not only of the common good, but how we together can be invested with one another in something other than just ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's encouraging that is attractive and inspiring to people right now.
Yeah. When we say classical schools, I'm not sure that everybody even knows what that means. So could you just brief us in on classical education? Does everybody have to take Latin and violin?
Well, a lot of them do require Latin, but not all of them. But there is something, I think, that there's something formative, right? It's the idea that we discipline ourselves to a set of practices that will form our minds and our souls and our bodies. So the goal is not just like, how will this be useful tomorrow, but what kind of person will this formation make you become? So yeah, it's often Socratic. It's often great booksy. They read a lot of books and try to engage in discussion. It often follows some kind of structure laid out by Dorothy Sayers of like grammar, logic, rhetoric. So there's different concrete iterations of it, I suppose, but all these methods kind of are born out of this conviction that there is truth, there is goodness, and there's beauty, and education should introduce students to those and help them participate more fully in them.
Okay, Professor, have you already read or are you familiar with Jeffrey Rosen's The Pursuit of Happiness, How Classical Writers on Virtue Inspired the Lives of the Founders and Defined America?
No, but it sounds
Okay,
interesting.
It's a brand new book. He's the CEO of the National Constitution Center. Fair to say, not a Christian, but he was surprised. He was surprised at what he discovered when he went looking for the meaning of happiness and what the pursuit of happiness really meant in the Declaration of Independence. And he was surprised to discover by reading what the founders were reading, that it's about the pursuit of virtue, that it has nothing to do with what we have been led to believe happiness is or the pursuit of happiness is. And so he's like had this like aha moment. And so he's on this tour of very, very secular outlets. And I haven't heard him interviewed by a lot of folks sort of, on our side of the aisle,
Yeah.
Who would not be surprised by this. But because he's done such a thorough job of bringing these, bringing these very, very classical writings forward, because obviously our founders were classically educated.
Right. And,
So
and as
anyway,
you point out, that's exactly right. But the language of pursuit of happiness has shifted a lot today, and is not necessarily what Jefferson meant by that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he's like he is like not only got his jaw dropped when he goes on, he on NPR or wherever else, and he's like, that's not what it means. Like, it's not what we thought. And it's really, really good
That's great.
I mean, like, yeah, there's all this. So anyway, The Pursuit of Happiness. How
Look it up.
classical writers on virtue. Yeah. Jeffrey Rosen. I could even send you the link. All right. We will probably not have Jeffrey Rosen on, but maybe you will examine it, or others like you, and then we can talk about it more. Because I do think it's good content.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go. I like giving assignments to the professors.
My students would as well.
Right. Hey, Jeff, as always, thank you so much, brother. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Carmen.
Absolutely. The good news of the gospel is so very strange. Have you noticed that? I mean, so just think about the strangeness of what we are about to embark on as we walk with Jesus to the cross. Like, the good news of the gospel is so very strange. We call the Friday upon which Jesus was crucified we call it Good Friday. The good news of the gospel is so very strange. Well, the good news of the very strange gospel is showing up in places like Gaza. So the Christians in Gaza have discovered a silver lining in the midst of the war. Muslims have grown weary of the hate and the revenge and the killing and are open to the gospel like never before. That is strange. That is the strangeness of the gospel. In Ukraine, there's now an effort to raise up 1,000 missionary pastors from among the Christians across the country. Why? Well, 20% of the people who were pastors prior to the war are either on the front lines of the war or displaced. Ukraine was and continues to be like the buckle of the Bible Belt of Eastern Europe, with more churches per capita than any other nation on the continent. And according to ministries that are working in the region, Christians in Ukraine have been raised up for such a time as this. Now, that is a strange gospel. That is some strange good news. They're asking that we would pray that the Lord of the harvest would send out more workers because the harvest is plentiful among the Ukrainian people, but the workers are few. Those are just two of the stories at the top of the page at Mission Network News. And Ruth Kramer is going to join us next for stories about what's happening with our brothers and sisters in Christ in Russia, Haiti, Iran, and Ecuador. That's up next here on Mornings with Carmen. All right, our friend Ruth Kramer is here with us from Mission Network News. You can find everything we're talking about today and so much more at missionnews.org. Good morning, Ruth.
Morning.
Good morning. Prayers for you. I know that your head is hurting a little bit this morning, so thank you so much for being with us, even in the midst of your personal suffering. Like that is a gift. So thank you so much. Fill us in on what you know about in terms of what's happening in churches in Russia, their resourcefulness and their perseverance in these politically charged times.
Well, this story comes about because we went to our partners who are serving Russian churches to ask them, what does the election of Vladimir Putin mean for the freedom of religion, for the ability of these churches to continue doing ministry, given what we've been seeing as an ongoing crackdown against freedom of religion and freedom of speech. This is a situation where a lot of ministries don't want to talk politics, but it's impossible to talk about a story like, an election like this without involving the politics. So we kind of tiptoed around it as much as possible. The ministry is Slavic Gospel Association, and basically they say that there is a significant crackdown on any opposition to the government, and churches are in that firing line. However, they do continue ministry discreetly. They are doing as much as they can to continue their normal evangelism and worship, sending out missionary pastors and things like that throughout the country of Russia. They're also engaged with work, and I don't know how to describe this kind of work. I would call it restorative work, reconciliation kind of work across the border with Ukrainian churches. Given that the election took place with the shadow of war hanging over it, you can't ignore the fact that, that Russia is at war with Ukraine, and that there are a lot of really strong feelings about that situation from the Ukrainian side as well as from the Russian side. So the fact that they're able to do some reconciliatory work to come together united under Christ is an amazing thing altogether. This isn't a movement that exists. It is still very small because of the pushback that they would be receiving from that. In the meantime, churches in Russia are continuing to expand their focus on ministry into the Arctic Circle and to Far East Russia. So they're continuing to pray for open doors to reach regions with the hope of Christ. Be praying for the pastors and the missionary pastors, children's workers, regional pastors, that they're going to be walking through this situation with wisdom, that they'll function in spite of some increasing pressure some changing religion laws that are going to be taking effect in places like Belarus. And I think we can just continue to pray for strength, because this is an ongoing situation that wears heavy on all sides. You pray for the strength of Ukrainian church leaders, pray for the strength of Russian believers as well. That the name of Christ remains central, and it continues to be lifted up.
We're going to turn our attention now to Haiti. For those of you not aware of the escalation, I know it's even hard to imagine that there's been an escalation in violence in Haiti, but the gang attacks moved into a part of Port-au-Prince that's considered upmarket. You and I would talk about maybe a wealthy suburb. You and I might think about a part of the community that had, to this point, been protected from the gang violence. And not only were these homes invaded, but many people have been killed and their bodies left in the streets. Port-au-Prince, it is fair to say, is is in total chaos. Law and order are no longer ruling that place. Ruth, I know that you have some insights in terms of what is happening with Haiti in terms of ministries on the ground there.
Yeah, I'm going to say, first of all, because this is a question that gets asked frequently, are there any Americans left in Haiti? And the answer is yes. There are missionaries who stayed behind as long as possible. There's about 1,000 Americans who are still trying to get out of Haiti. The State Department is basically saying, we'll try to get you out, but you're going to have to get to Cap Haitian to be able to do that. And that is north. That is not going to be easy to leave Port-au-Prince because the gangs basically control the roads. They are acting with impunity at this stage. When the prime minister announced his resignation, basically anything left of law and order collapsed. So Port-au-Prince's chaos is starting to spread throughout the country. And what we're seeing is a massive displacement of people. 15,000 Haitians were uprooted last week alone, and that's not including anything that we've seen recently. The numbers continue to swell as people are fleeing Port-au-Prince and heading up north. A lot of them are arriving in Cap Haitian because Cap Haitian is a large city. It does have a semblance of law and order. They do still have some infrastructure, and there are a lot of ministries that are reaching out to try to help people as they're coming up. So many of the ministries that have been so far untouched by the chaos in Port-au-Prince are starting to feel some of the repercussions. And they were expecting this because this is typically what happens when you have things go bananas in Port-au-Prince. We have Radio 4 VEH, which is Transworld Radio's partner. We have Christian World Outreach. We have several American Missionary Hospital ministries in Cap Haitian, as well as for Haiti with Love. And so they were standing by ready to receive and try to respond to some of the needs as best as possible. They do have a functioning airport in Cap Haitian, which is why the State Department says we'll get you out, but you have to get to Cap Haitian first. And so you still have some means of being able to leave the island. A lot of times what happens is people flee to the city. And when I say people, I mean people who wanted to get out of the Port-au-Prince area, but want to stay in Haiti. We're talking like missionaries and expats and things like that. They get to Cap Haitian and try to set up like a temporary base so they can continue to do ministry and remain in country. So be praying for those folks as they navigate a very tricky situation as the violence continues to spread. Transworld Radio isn't typically a humanitarian aid organization. They are the local radio station is trying to respond to meet physical needs, but really what they're focusing on right here is continuing to broadcast the hope of Christ, because people are turning to radio for information as well as for anything that will give them some encouragement that it's not just doom and gloom all the time. So they're responding to the messages they're hearing in the hope of Christ. And they're finding, because of all of these other ministries that are up there now, that there are people to talk to. So you have a discipleship movement that is starting to blossom as a result of what's happening with the displacement. And that's good news. But as we see the things continue to kind of be a vacuum of power, Yeah, there are concerns it's going to get worse before it gets better. So you're talking regional leaders who are calling for kind of a transitionary council, but the gang leaders are basically saying this isn't going to happen unless you let us be part of the power sharing deal. That's why anybody who's been watching this, the state of emergency is likely to continue. It's martial law. It's kind of every man for himself at this point. Be praying for the ministries that do have buildings in Cap Haitian, because as the violence spreads, as things continue to kind of spiral out of control, security is an issue, especially with the lack of resources, food and water, and people who are desperate do desperate things. So continue to be praying wisdom and security and protection for those who are operating as the hands and feet of Christ.
When we think about the spread of the gospel, and we think about the generational transfer of the gospel, I want to pivot with you to conversations about what we see happening in places around the world. You have a piece at Mission Network News on Lebanon, how God is reaching and transforming Lebanon's emerging generation, and there's another one here about Iran, fatherless and fearless Gen Z poised for gospel ignition. Ruth, let's take a very brief break. And then when we come back, let's talk about the spread of the gospel. Let's talk about the ways in which, the gospel isn't just still good news. It is redemptive news, and it is reaching into places and into lives and into circumstances where all other hope is lost. I also want to talk with you about the headline there about the Jesus film and its availability now in Ecuador. So we're talking with Ruth Kramer from Mission Network News. You can find these headlines and so much more. It's a wonderful place to connect with what's happening around the world, the spread of the gospel. People like you and me, Jesus people, who are on the front lines of what is happening in places where you and I may never set our feet, but where the gospel goes forth nonetheless. So we'll continue our conversation with Ruth Kramer here in just a moment. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. Anne texted me, and then we had a conversation on the phone. She's 86 years old, and her husband, Bob, is 96. She listens to the podcast every single day, and she gets a lot of encouragement for her walk of faith in the midst of a life that has grown difficult and weary in many ways. Anne has a faith radio story, and so do you. If Faith Radio is a part of your daily journey with God, we'd love to hear your story. Share how God is using Faith Radio to encourage you and help you grow at myfaithradio.com. And who knows, maybe Anne will hear your story and be encouraged as well. Continuing our conversation with Ruth Kramer from Mission Network News. All right, Ruth, what is happening in Iran? This headline is, the fatherless and the fearless are poised for gospel ignition.
This is actually really exciting as a result of some of the things that have come out, the political stuff that you've been seeing in Iran. I had the opportunity to speak with several Iranian ministries, Iran Alive, Sat 7 Pars, and Heart for Iran. Not too long ago. And what was interesting is, nobody knew that I was talking to the other ministries. They cooperate together within their ministry spheres. But the thing that was kind of emerging as the trend is specific ministry to the young, basically, the young generation under 30. The population of Iran is a young generation. So what you're seeing kind of emerge right now is a disenfranchised generation who is kind of turned off by the traditional religion and politics that are connected to it, and they're seeking something else. So that whole idea of turning away from religion, and you have a generation of nuns, the nun meaning they don't choose a religion at all, is a thing that's actually starting to emerge out of Iran, even though we've been hearing that the underground church in Iran is one of the fastest growing in the world per capita. And that's true. But the young generation wasn't really among those numbers until recently. And so what we're seeing is this push now by ministries to start reaching the young generation under 30. They're kind of the ones that feel like they don't have an older authority figure over them, who cares for them. They've been raised in a society that doesn't really care about anything they believe in. They don't feel like they have much of a future left because anything they would have had as a future, say as a young college student, has been kind of swept away. The sanctions have come down because of some of the things that have been going on politically speaking. So there's not a lot in the way of hope for jobs, hope for careers, hope for family. Nobody can really afford anything. The unemployment is exponential in their generation. So it's been a very difficult kind of a thing that they're facing, and because of that, they're restless. They're kind of angry. They're rejecting a lot of things, and that also means that they're free from Islam because they don't feel like that is a thing that binds them anymore. They are absolutely rejecting it because they don't feel that it's giving them the answers or the things that that was promised. So they are looking for something else, and they don't have fear of death as a result of that. They were the ones that were leading the protests until recently, and it's because they have no fear of anything. They were like, our future is gone, we're dead anyway, that they came out so strongly in protest of what was happening with the traditional government. And it is this kind of thinking and movement that leads people like Dr. Hormel Shariat to say that it is possible that within this young generation, these Gen Zers and the millennials, we could see a shift in power in Iran, where we might even be able to see Iran as free within our lifetime. It may not last forever, but there seems to be a movement that where the elements that existed in other revolutions exist, but there's more to it. There's more undercurrent that will carry it through for genuine change. So continue to be praying for this as these young people are turning to uh, well, they're searching for hope. They're seeing something different in the followers of Christ. They're seeing the God of the Bible because of the other believers who are living the gospel out with them and doing more than just preaching at them. They're living it out. They're seeing the difference, and they're coming to Christ. So all these new ministries that are coming forward as a result of this Gen Z energy are starting to ask us to be praying for them, because the global church will need to respond to this. So if we thought it was already busy with, the underground church exploding in growth in Iran, we haven't seen anything yet, is what basically we're being told.
Yeah, huge demographic shift taking place. The majority, more than 60% of Iran's population, under the age of 30. And so that's true in some other places around the world in terms of just a huge percentage of the population being very, very young. But in Iran, because this generation of emerging people also has this angst. I mean, the young and the restless is a good way to say it, right? They have this angst. They want there to be something that's worth giving your life for, and they don't see it in the Iran that they know. That provides great hope. And so we want to be praying for Christians who are in Iran and the way that God is growing the church. Fastest growing church in the world is in Iran. And so obviously that is not something that the government supports there. And so we want to be praying for God's favor in all directions. Talk with us about the Jesus film. The Jesus film is certainly something that people will be familiar with, maybe surprising to some that it's still being translated and being seen for the very first time in some places. Talk with us about Ecuador.
Yeah, this is actually a really exciting story because it's a full circle story. So this particular language is the Waorani tribe language from Ecuador. It is the 2100th translation of the Jesus film. It was specifically requested by the Waorani tribe. Now, that might sound familiar to you because the connection there is that their spearing party killed 5 American Christian missionaries back in 1956. That was the movie, The Tip of the Spear. And so you're talking Jim Elliot and Nate Saint in that party. Redemption came full circle on multiple fronts. In fact, the first Waorani warrior who actually killed Nate Saint, his name is Menkai, came to Christ. And he evangelized his family and parts of his tribe. So his 3 grandsons and his older grandson are now followers of Christ. In fact, the older grandson helped to translate the gospel into Rwani at the end of the film's premiere at the event that they had in Ecuador. So it's very interesting because what was basically a headhunter's tribe has now become the tip of the spear in the evangelistic movement out of Ecuador into other tribes. And after the film's premiere from the Rwani tribe's language, the Jesus Film staff actually equipped more believers to be local missionaries. So they were actually giving training on how to show the Jesus Film on a tablet so they can go to other villages and continue to do discipleship and follow up with people who see Jesus' story for the first time and ask Jesus to come into their hearts. It's an exciting thing because it just shows that there's never a dead end in these kinds of things. You know, the gospel does come full circle, and it's a story that I wanted to make sure that your listeners were able to hear.
It is so exciting. It is such a great story. So thank you so much for sharing it. That's Ruth Kramer. The stories we talked about today and so much more you can find at missionnews.org. Ruth, we're going to be praying for you as the Lord heals your body as well. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you walking with Jesus step by step in this upcoming Holy Week? Are you engaging with Jesus as he makes his way not only into Jerusalem, but to what's coming? How did Jesus spend his final days on earth? I mean, he knew the cross was coming, right? But he didn't run away from it. So what does it look like to walk with Jesus through his final days of earthly ministry? If you're not following along with us, Faith Radio has some incredible resources that we don't want you to miss out on. And they're also really great for sharing with other people. So we have some just incredible stuff on Facebook and Instagram, Walking with Jesus, using these social media posts. We're also reading the Bible together during Holy Week. So if you have not ever walked with Jesus to the cross during Holy Week, using the passages of Scripture that just literally lay out step by step and day by day what he experienced, I'm just going to invite you to go to myfaithradio.com and join us in reading the Bible together during Holy Week. You're going to get a study guide and instant access to a podcast. Anyway, we want you to join us as we walk with Jesus to the cross in this upcoming Holy Week. We talked yesterday about a great resource that's going to be on Faith Radio from 10 to noon this coming Saturday. Don't want you to miss that. Anyway, all the details at myfaithradio.com. We've got another hour together next. You're listening to Mornings with Carmen. Thanks for listening to Mornings with Carmen LaBerge. Podcasts like this are available because of your support. If it's important to you to hear things that encourage your faith, click the link in the show notes to give now. And thanks.